Okay, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I hope that you've all enjoyed your lunch, but we would like to proceed with the important part of our program. While dessert and coffee is still being served, we'll proceed with the program portion of the Mamaroneck-Larchmont League of Women Voters Midwinter Luncheon. It's hard to believe that we were worried about setting a snow date for today's program. Okay. Our speaker was born in nearby Newburgh, New York, of immigrant parents. At the age of 8, her father died, and her mother became the family's sole provider and model of strength, much like many young women find themselves in today. Despite difficult times and many obstacles, knowing that education was the key to her future, she worked her way through college and through law school when many young ladies were not doing that kind of thing at that time. After marrying and raising 3 children, she re-entered the workplace full-time as an assistant district attorney in Queens County, assigned to the Special Victims Bureau. But wanting to do more, she ran for Congress, she won, and she served the 9th District for 3 terms. Her rise within her political party was spectacular, and it was the 1984 presidential election that thrust her into the national spotlight when she made history as the first woman to be nominated by a major political party for the vice presidency of the United States. I think we all remember that moment, and we were all glued to our televisions that day. And it was not only a proud moment for women, but it was a proud moment for our country. A grueling 4-month campaign followed, and she recounts it with candor, with insight, and even humor in her first book, Ferraro, My Story. For me, reading that book brought me back to a time when a woman running for national office was a unique and curious and even a questionable notion, and that was only less than 7 years ago. Her campaign opened the doors to not only women, but to Americans of all backgrounds to say, I too can participate in government. I too have a voice. I too can even run for President of the United States. Well, the League of Women Voters has served that same role throughout its history, opening doors, working for change, and giving voice to issues that concern Americans. As the standard bearer of the women's rights movement, our speaker joined the ranks of all the great women of the suffrage movement who were the founders of the League of Women Voters. They opened the doors for her and for us through which to carry the banner to yet another generation. Since that memorable campaign, she has remained characteristically busy, lecturing and teaching both in this country and abroad, as well as working in her political party and writing a book about individual rights. She has been an active board member of many national and international organizations and is the founding president of the International Institute of Women's Political Leadership, which, as she just told me, is a nonpartisan organization that encourages women in politics around the world, actually. Several weeks ago, the topic of today's address was chosen, Tough Questions for Tough Times. Unfortunately, as recent events unfold around the world, the questions and the answers have gotten still tougher. We look forward to hearing the insights of this very special person. It is a great privilege to have her here today with us to speak to us. Please help me welcome Geraldine Ferraro.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Bev, for that very kind introduction. I'm delighted to be here with you today and to have the opportunity to discuss a few issues of importance to all of us. I'm particularly pleased to be able to do so with a group of people who are so well informed. I have a tremendous amount of respect for the League. I really believe that your efforts to educate the voters on the issues facing our country is an invaluable service. And your continued push to register and educate more voters is essential to the democratic process. We have seen in the past few weeks how crucial it is to make sure that Americans are well informed. Each night we sit glued to our seats as we watch the war unfold in our living rooms. Stakes are high in the Gulf. In fact, since lives and the future of nations are on the line, they can be no higher. And while campaigns too often drift into Madison Avenue advertising, slogans, and negative charges, we know that at the very least, during League-sponsored debates, candidates are forced to speak on the issues. I honestly believe you can take part of the credit for what I consider was quality debate in both chambers of the Congress several weeks ago on the resolution to support military action. I remember when I was in Washington, you were the one group I couldn't hedge with. You knew as much about what was going on as did I. It was very refreshing. I also want you to know that I stand staunchly behind the drive to not only continue presidential and vice presidential debates, but I believe they should be increased in number. I was in Korea last spring, and Ambassador Don Gregg told me over lunch that he has known the president a long time and was with him throughout the 1984 campaign. He said that he never saw George Bush as nervous as he was on the night of our debate. It made my day. I didn't think anyone could discern how I was feeling that night, but my youngest daughter, Laura, later told me that she knew I was nervous because she saw me dipping the potato chips into the whipped cream. And I will never forget driving to the auditorium. My husband leaned over to me and asked, "Are you nervous, Tara?" To which I responded, "No, John. It reminds me of the night you were driving me to the hospital to have Donna." I remember thinking to myself, how did I ever get into this situation? Well, it was my choice. I had to go inside and deliver, right? I personally want to thank you, League, for your participation in 1984. It was an incredible campaign that opened doors of opportunity for women in this country, and I am very grateful that I got to represent all of you on that ticket. But in 1991, I am really not so much interested in looking back, except to learn from the experience as I am in looking ahead. We are living through critical times. Power balances are being tested in the Middle East. Alliances we never imagined a year ago are tenuously holding together. We are, like it or not, at war. And though women have always served bravely in our armed services in the Persian Gulf, we are seeing more women in military action than ever before. You know, after the '84 campaign, when I gave a woman's speech, I would go through all the firsts we have experienced. First woman in space, the first woman on the Supreme Court, the first woman on a major national ticket of a major party, the first woman conservative rabbi. I'm still waiting for the first woman Catholic priest. The first woman to win the 18-day dog sled race in Alaska. And now I can add the first woman deserter, and unfortunately the first woman prisoner of war in 50 years. The expertise these women soldiers bring to their jobs is evident, running the gamut from operating our amazingly sophisticated technological systems to repairing trucks, to designing strategy, and of course to providing medical care. But as we see the increased involvement of women in the military, I can't help but wish we had more women in Congress making policy. In analyzing public opinion about the war in the Persian Gulf, we find again, just as in Vietnam, that women as a group were much more reluctant to enter a shooting war than men. That seems to coincide with the findings of Harvard professor Carol Gilligan, who in her book, In a Different Voice, tells us that instead of thinking in win-lose terms, women are more apt to see the gray area in between. Instead of seeking confrontation, women are more likely to negotiate. Instead of thinking in terms of the immediate, women tend more to think in terms of generations to come. So perhaps things would have been different if women had a wider voice in the decision-making of this country. But then again, perhaps not. What is particularly disturbing is the fact that we were already in crisis here at home before we went to war in the Gulf. Our national security is not only measured by the sophistication of the Patriot missiles, by the superiority of our aircraft, by the ability of our smart bombs to hone in on a target, or the strength of our troops. It is also measured by the health of our economy, by the effectiveness of our educational system, and by the quality of life we provide our citizens. And on these last points, we seem to be losing all the battles. The economic policies of the Reagan years has left our government $3.4 trillion in debt. Each year we pay $180 billion just to service that debt. During the 1980s, the top 1% of this country got tax breaks and paid an average $26,000 each less each year in taxes, while assistance was cut to local governments from coast to coast, and we've just had a discussion on that. It's easy to see the result. Homelessness, crime, an educational system that's broken down, and a critical lack of health care for everybody. When those young people come home from the Gulf, will we be able to give them the educational opportunities the military promised them in those TV ads? How about jobs? And there will be casualties. Will we be able to care for them? Our hospitals are already overflowing. We have a critical nurse shortage. Our emergency rooms have long waiting lines, not only because of increased violence on our streets, but because so many people are letting minor illnesses for which they can't afford to get care deteriorate to the point where they require immediate emergency service. In New York City, you can wait for days for a bed in a hospital hallway before you're put into a room. Sure, we have the most amazing technological fighting equipment. We see it every night on TV. And we also have the world's best medical technology and life-saving drugs at our disposal. But our health care costs are so out of control and our delivery system is so fragmented that we're not getting the value we need despite the vast amount of money we spend. Many of those young people who come home from this war are going to need health care. We as a nation had better start getting ready to provide it. And not only to them, but to the 37 million others who are currently not covered, more than 3/4 of whom are working people and their families. The statistics are absolutely mind-boggling. We have the 17th highest infant mortality rate in the world. In Harlem, the infant mortality rate is higher than it is in Bangladesh. 1 in 4 babies in this country are born to mothers who receive no prenatal care, resulting in about 10,000 infant deaths and approximately 100,000 permanently disabled children. On the other end of life, in 1988, 7 million older Americans needed assistance in taking care of themselves, and by the end of this decade, that number will be up to 9 million. To add to the problem, 15 million others are underinsured, unable to cover the cost of a major sickness or illness or an accident, if indeed it occurs. And it isn't just the individual who's suffering. Businesses also are alarmed by rising health insurance costs. And you can't blame them. The average per employee cost was $2,600 in 1989. It rose $600 in 1 year, up to $3,200 by 1990. What's it going to be in 1991? These costs affect us and they affect businesses because businesses pass them along by raising prices on goods and services. Ultimately, it affects our ability to compete in the marketplace. As a nation, we can do better. We pride ourselves on being one of the most advanced and compassionate countries in the world. Yet among industrialized countries, only the United States and South Africa don't have a national health plan. The issue is no longer whether to extend care to those who don't have it. It is how can we best provide affordable care, high-quality health, and long-term insurance for everyone. And by the way, I'm not only talking about basic health insurance here. I'm only talking about basic health insurance. I'm not talking about preventative care or ongoing primary care. That is key to preventing sickness and disease and maintaining health, but it really is so expensive we can't even talk about it. When George Bush was running for president, he told those Americans who had no health insurance they would be able to buy into Medicaid. He gives honest politicians a bad name. Those Americans are still uninsured, and we've seen no buy-in plan at all or any other health insurance proposal from the president. It's time we start recognizing that this is not a problem we can continue to ignore. Last Saturday was the first anniversary of my mother's death. I really got to understand the problems with our system a lot better during those 10 weeks of her illness. My mom was very tiny, but she was very tough. She empowered herself all her life in everything that she did, and she empowered me to take on the tough fights and the tough challenges when the cause was right and just. As she got older, she got frailer. In fact, I have to tell you that she was standing here next to Beth. She would have felt very comfortable because she's very tiny, very small. She was very frail, but in her old age, she really figured out a way to continue her empowerment, and it took no more energy than that required to utter, "Geraldine Ferraro is my daughter." She once said to me, "People are nice to me because I'm your mother." She was so proud of me I didn't have the heart to tell her that people were nice to her because she was nice to people. The only time it really did help to be my mom, however, was when she went to the hospital. The administrators went out of their way when she was admitted to shorten her waiting time for a bed, and I'm grateful for that. But what the administrators couldn't do was cure the shortage of nurses. They couldn't reduce the number of beds each nurse was responsible for, and they couldn't eliminate the forced overtime. I spent 12 hours a day in the hospital with my mom, and then my brother would stay until a private practical nurse would come on at night. My mother didn't need medication or monitoring during that time, but she did need attention. She needed help eating. When she needed the bedpan, she wanted it immediately. She was 65 pounds, so she needed to be moved and rubbed down to prevent bed sores, and most of the other patients on her floor had exactly the same needs. When she came home from the hospital, Medicare provided a home health attendant 4 hours a day, 3 days a week. It was ludicrous. I'm a housekeeper and a full-time nursing attendant, took care of my mom until she died. I didn't intend to get this personal, but the issue of health care is personal. It is personal for all of us. One thing everyone agrees on is that our current system is not working. Throughout the nation, there is a growing consensus that we need to stop applying bandages to our health care system, and we must seek to cure its fundamental problems. Business organizations, physicians groups, children's advocates, aging organizations, and lawmakers are working on a variety of possible solutions. And as you can imagine, every single one of those solutions will cost money. I'm sure you've all heard of the Pepper Commission's proposal. Free acute care takes a combined public-private approach, which would rely on employer mandates, tax incentives, and a new public program for the unemployed. Its long-term care proposal consists of a comprehensive social insurance program to provide home and community-based care and 3 months of nursing home service. Congressman Pete Stark of California, who chairs the Ways and Means Subcommittee on Health, where any health care bill will start, has proposed a plan that would provide health and long-term care to all residents financed through the income tax system. That's going to be even harder to sell because it's going to raise taxes when we really can't afford it. And there are a host of other serious proposals pending, submitted by Senators Kennedy, Mitchell, and Kerry. Fixing the health care system won't be easy. No matter what solution we choose, we will be asked to make difficult choices. Economic choices, like how do we pay for a better health care system, especially in light of our budget deficits, the fallout from the S&L debacle, and the costs of the Gulf War. Quality of life choices, like whether we will be able to go to our own physician anytime we please. And finally, ethical choices, like whether everyone will receive the most advanced medical technology available, regardless of cost. Tough choices. Choices that will have to be made if we are to provide health care for everyone. There is one more choice, and that's to do nothing and let matters get worse. But is that truly an option for a nation that considers itself compassionate and humane? I don't think so, and I'm rather inclined to think you don't either. When our troops come home from a desert storm, they will bring with them a host of new military and diplomatic challenges for this world to address. Wouldn't it be nice if they found one less domestic challenge awaiting them? Wouldn't it be great if our government leaders could somehow figure this one out? Thanks again for having me, and I look forward to your questions now. Thank you. Now, let me give you a little bit of a disclaimer of sorts. If you don't want to talk about health care, you don't have to. If you want to talk about something else, we can. But I think that this is an important issue, which is why I brought it up, but we'll go wherever you want to go. So feel free.
What do you think of the movement that's starting in the far west about limiting the terms of senators and Congress?
I don't, and it's also the one that the president said. Can you all hear the question? What do you think about the movement to limit the terms of senators and congressmen? It was also mentioned, as you I'm sure have heard in the President's State of the Union address. I happen to not agree with it, and I'll tell you why. I don't agree with it because I have served in the Congress, and I knew people who, as soon as they put their hand up and said, "I promise were in there about 5 seconds too long. You know, really, I mean, length of time is not a determinant on whether or not you're going to be good or bad. It's how the person is who gets elected. And there are people down there in both parties whom I really think, especially at a time like this, where you do need experience. And I'll start with the Republicans first. But I think Bob Dole has been invaluable in the Senate to operate. I mean, I don't agree with the message that comes from the White House, but I do think that he does it effectively and brings it to the Congress so that it's able to be debated. On the other side, I mean, and he's been in there quite a while, Claude Pepper, there was no more articulate spokesman for the elderly of this country than Claude Pepper. And he was well into his 80s. And he was, you know, he should never have been limited, and I don't think Dole should. Again, there are people there who, you had one representative from here before Nita Lowey who was in much too long. I'm glad you limited his term in Congress. It wasn't necessary for anybody else to do it by statute. And I also think on the other hand, that, to be quite frank, it should be up to the people to determine who their representatives are and not be limited. So I kind of don't agree with it. Okay, go. Oh, I'll have fun answering that one. The question, what do you mean, what? What, you didn't hear that question? The question was, are you going to run for the U.S. Senate? To be very honest, I don't know. What I'm doing is Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday of next week, we're doing focus groups throughout the state. I would love to be in the Senate. I think I'd be a superb senator. But I've run in races where you win, and I've run in races where you lose. I prefer winning. And I won't run unless I really think I have a shot of winning it. We're doing focus groups in order to find out how people feel about me, whether or not the celebrity translates into votes, whether or not people remember. I was a teacher for 5 years in the New York City public school system. I'm a lawyer. I was a prosecutor. I was a member of Congress. Whether or not they believe that that's sufficient experience to send me back down there. I'll do focus groups. If it's not possible, I won't do it. If it's not possible, I will help whoever the Democratic candidate is against Al D'Amato. I really just feel that he does not belong in the United States. I know this is not political. No, this is not partisan. But I have to tell you, you have to take a look at what is happening for the good of not only your community, of the state, of this country, but of the world. And I think some of his votes are just so wrong. I think they're a problem. I go back to 1980 with Reagan's economic policies. That's in large measure the reason we're having problems in education, in environment. I mean, the programs that were coming, the monies that were coming out of Washington to help locally are not coming anymore. And part of that is because the priorities of the administration were so messed up, and those priorities are supported by Al D'Amato. So I don't know what I'm going to do, but we shall find out.
What would you do then in order to limit the power of incumbents against viable candidates who just can't fight?
I support limitations on campaign financing. I have to tell you. And I have to tell you the other thing, I also find it disingenuous to just go after PACs. That's not the thing. The issue is how much money is spent. And when we're talking about a Senate race, somebody said to me before, how much will it cost? Would you believe approximately $6 million for a primary and another $6 million for a general? Now that's of course, that's what it would cost me if everybody else was able to raise that much money. That's how much I'd have to raise. To be very frank, with the economy being what it is, I don't think anybody's going to be able to raise that kind of money, including the incumbent senator. But that's where I would go. I would go to some sort of public financing. I would go to some sort of limitation on spending. I would do it by giving free television time. You know, in my district in Queens, when I was first, and I've been on this whole thing with public financing ever since I was in the Congress. I was a co-sponsor of that bill when I was in Congress. My constituents would say, you think we're going to spend our tax money to get you, to run for office? I say, you honestly don't realize how much of your money is being wasted because of the fact that people are voting, members of Congress and senators are voting the interests of their campaign contributors. I mean, and it's cynical, yeah, but it's honest. And anybody who tells you that if they get $100,000 from the investment bankers of the world that they're not paying any attention to legislation that affects them, you know better. You know better. And I mean, I think that should be eliminated. And the way you eliminate it is not necessarily PACs, because you can get $100,000 in single $1,000 contributions. It's still the special interest. And that, if that's the money that's going to make you a winner, you're going to be very, very nice to those people. So, you know, my feeling is go in that direction to eliminate it. The limitations on terms is terrific. The Republicans would love it because they'd finally they think they'd have an even chance in getting a majority in the House. But I have to tell you, know who would benefit by that? Women. Women and people of color. And the reason is because when you get women in an open race, you know, we're good candidates. When you're elected to office, women work, I'm sorry, guys. I'm sorry. I'm not putting down the mayor or the superintendent. But, you know, the greater majority of women, when they get elected, it's a full-time job. They work very hard. I mean, Abscam, you saw those guys, never a woman. I mean, it really, honest, so it would really be better, in a way, for women, because there'd be a lot of open seats. But I still think it's the wrong way to go. I'd rather do it by limiting campaign financing and fundraising and all the rest of that stuff, spending. Go.
I have two questions, if I may. One is, could you help me understand the budget in terms of the articles that have recently come out that this war is not really going to affect our economy. It's been, you know, touted about 30 billion, 50, 80, depends on how long the war lasts. It really does not affect the economy. And yet, when we talk about financing and using the budget for social programs, it affects the economy and we can't afford it. Can you please help me understand?
I think what we both have to do is get George Bush to explain that to both of us. Because that's what he constantly says. He also, by the way, has said that we're just now sliding into recession, but we're going to be out in about 2 or 3 days if we may not even notice it. Actually, I don't believe for 1 minute that the budget is going to be unaffected by the Gulf War. I also don't think the budget is going to be unaffected by the S&L crisis and about what we might expect next from either commercial banks or insurance companies. It has to be affected. Whether it's something is considered on budget or off budget, which is how they kind of keep things from affecting the total number on the budget itself, there's only so much money that is available. And if you have $1 trillion budget, which we already have, and if you're spending, as I mentioned before, $180 billion to service a debt that has been accumulated, $2.2 billion of that $3.2 billion has been accumulated since January of 1980. If we're doing all of those things, there's only so much money that's left. And so what will happen is the only way it can affect the money that goes out to states or to cities or to other localities, or go into programs, whether it's into Medicare or Social Security or wherever it is, the only way it could not affect it is if indeed we passed a tax to pay for it. Now, that's a real possibility. People are talking about a surcharge in order to pay for the war if it goes on for a long period of time. And that's probably what will happen. Now, how will that affect the economy? More taxes? People slow down the amount of spending they have? Or they do? Perhaps a longer recession? I mean, I don't want to sound like the voice of doom and gloom, but I think we really have to take a close look at these things honestly and realistically. Does that mean that I would say then, well, you know, let's not give these guys, by that I mean generically, women and men, fighting in the Gulf, the weapons they need to do the job? No. I think we're in a war. I would not have voted for military action. I would have voted for continuation of the sanctions. But we are in a war. They should be given the weapons that are necessary to get them finished and get them home. But it will affect our economy. It has to. You had a second question.
Yeah, the other thing that's been bothering me is the fact that so many families...
Oh, I'll repeat it. I'm sorry.
I'll try to speak loud. So many families are being broken up as a result of this war, where fathers and mothers are being taken away from their children. I had always thought that it was policy, now maybe it's not, not to break up a family this way. I remember in World War II that sons, if they were in danger of being killed or had been injured, the second or third son would stay home or be returned home. Now we're taking mothers away from their children who are as young as infants. Could you tell me what the policy
Did you all hear that? Okay. Actually, the law that you were speaking about, the Sullivan Law, which is not really a law, it was policy. I remember seeing that movie when I was a kid. Did you remember seeing that? For those of you who are younger, there is a movie about a family in the Second World War, and they were the Sullivan family, and they had 5 sons. Did anybody else see that movie besides me? Okay, okay. The Sullivan brothers went out, and they were all assigned to the same ship, 5 sons. And you see them, it was really one of those movies where you go in and you start crying at the beginning, and you don't stop until you go home, and then you think about it and you cry more. You see them growing up, and the kid tagging along behind, and the little one, and the end of the story, well, the almost end of the story is the ship goes down, the 5 of them get killed, and then you see them up in heaven with the little kid, the now is young sailor tagging along, which ruined me for about 20 years, I think, after I saw the movie. That was not the law. That was policy. There is now, interestingly enough, a family, and they've been getting quite a bit of press. They have 3 sons in the Gulf. And what they've been told is that if one gets killed, then the other 2 will be able to withdraw. Wait a minute. It's worse than that. If one gets killed, if the other 2 find out about it, they can ask to be relieved. And what the father said is they don't even know where they are. How would they know if one of them got killed? I mean, that's the situation. The other piece you're talking about are the families going at the same time, men and women going, leaving children at home. It is heartbreaking. That's undoubtedly due to our rules and regulations with reference to reservists. Remember, these young people who are over there are all volunteers. Remember that they're all people who never, I don't think for 1 minute, believe that they were ever going to find themselves in the situation they were in. They are all people, I'm sure, who wanted to do something a little bit better to lift themselves up in this country economically. And they're finding themselves in a terrible condition. We talked about that before. Perhaps the solution might be to pass regulations with reference to reservists, not allowing them to join. If indeed one is a member of the reserve, then the other should not be allowed to join and take advantage of the benefits. By the same token, if that happens, we do know which one will be given the short end of that stick as far as who can join and make the extra money and who not. So I think those are, I mean, they're valid concerns. They're issues that have to be dealt with. And I think that after this is over, there's going to be a lot of soul searching as to exactly what went on and what didn't go on, and exactly what should be the role of our reserve, more than perhaps a jobs and education program, which is how the military sold it. Okay.
As a former ADA, could you comment on the problem of racism in the judicial system?
As a former ADA, would I comment on the problem of racism in the judicial system? It's well, part of the problem in the judicial system, like anybody else, a member of the judiciary brings their own life experiences to their job, just like legislators do. The problem that we have with our judicial system is that it is small number women, very small percentage women, very small percentage of people of color. I'm not saying that I mean, most of the people who are sitting are doing a most adequate job, at least the ones I know, okay? And I have not been in a situation well, when I was in Queens, it worked on both sides. I mean, sometimes we had black judges who were terribly tough on white defendants, easier on black defendants, and sometimes white judges who did not understand anything at all about specific problems as far as race were concerned. But I think the way you deal with that is by making sure that we get appointments that reflect the population a little bit more and allow for much more of a dialogue between members of the judiciary. Also discussion at bar association events, which was not done years ago. I mean, a little thing, and I can speak more about gender-specific bias. When I was in the DA's office, we were, I think there were maybe about 8 of us in the entire office, out of an office of about 110. I was the one bureau chief. There were any cases that came before the court, we were treated a little bit differently. We'd call you miss. I mean, well, the DA, they'd speak about the guys, and miss so-and-so, could you come, a young lady, could you, I mean, that type of thing. I mean, his attitude. It was not easy. Women were sexually harassed, women lawyers were sexually harassed in the courtroom by every single member of the court personnel, from the cops who brought defendants in to court officers. I'm not saying, harassed in a lot of instances, but it's sufficiently harassed. I think what's happened over the last number of years is that the women's bar associations have turned around and said, enough of this garbage, guys. And they've done studies. They've brought out exactly what the actions are that they find offensive, and there has been movement to correct them. It's educating. It's splashing out the news about the inequities, and it's pressing for correction. I think the same thing has to be done on with reference to race. That's the only way that you can address the problems. Go.
I'd like to get back to the main thrust of your talk. I have been in the nursing profession for well over 20 years and have intimately knowledge of what you were talking about. If you were elected to a high office in our government, do you have any specific resolutions or ideas of how you could stem the hemorrhage that is going on in our healthcare system?
That's one of the reasons I spoke a little bit, because I know you people know about the commission, the Pepper Commission report. It is a superb job looking honestly and realistically at the problems. The bigger problem, and you will even have AARP say to you, they've got good ideas, but we're not standing behind any plan. The problem is costs. So if you say to me, what would you do? I mean, obviously we have to pay attention to the health care problem. We've got to get these people into the system. They have talked about, the Pepper Commission talks about the involvement of employers. The costs are high. The costs are high. I think what has to be done is we have to realistically look at how we can get at least basic health care at not too large a figure and get it implemented for the people who are uncovered, and then move ahead to see how we can improve other health care systems to the public. Health care, for instance, in Medicare. Medicare covers 99% of the elderly. It is a Medicare or Medicaid. It is wonderful. It is performing a job. There are still things that Medicare does not do. Medicare doesn't provide home health care. Medicare, the system doesn't allow for volunteers to take care of parents. Again, I don't understand how the Family Leave Act was vetoed by the President. Everybody talked about that bill as being wonderful for young mothers with little babies or people who had children at home. Do you know what it was wonderful for? It was wonderful for middle-aged women like me who, you've reached that point where you can say it without flinching, right? For middle-aged women like me, because we're the ones who are facing how to deal with elderly parents. Now, that bill doesn't cost a damn thing. All it allows is a woman to take 10 weeks to be home to take care of an elderly parent and guarantees her job will be there when she goes back. It doesn't even affect people with employees of less than 50. It was a little thing, but it's a first step. That should be there. There should also be some sort of looking at the nursing home system, which again, the second part of the Pepper Care bill does. It costs a fortune to put someone to a nursing home. There are lots of women who could be providers at home for family, and there is much more dignity to dying at home with family than there is in a nursing home. I also think it's cost effective. I think we've got to look into that as well. We have got to come up with innovative ideas to address the problems, but without costing a lot of money, at least in the short term. And that's the challenge. That's the challenge for the future.
Another healthcare-related question. I'm involved very closely with the reconstruction project at Kings County Hospital. A lot of the issues you talked about are very relevant to that project. And but one of the frustrating aspects is that New York State has so many conflicting goals that I think it stands in their way. Specifically, the construction techniques and methods of bidding the project out mean that the project will take twice as long to build than it would otherwise. So, we could get an $800 million project up and running on the streets for the citizens of Brooklyn in half the time, but we have all these very stringent regulations which are geared towards encouraging minority participation, construction by local contractors. It's like building a huge complex out of sugar cubes. It's a good goal, but it's a conflicting goal with delivering health care to the population.
It's no doubt a problem, and it also can be a little bit more increasing.
Look at it in terms of one trade-offs of one set of goals versus another set of goals.
What's trying to be done is trying to merge the two.
Right.
And it sometimes acts for less efficiency, but if indeed it is correcting a basic unfairness, which it is in the construction trades, with so many companies being now able to bid and being able to participate in the process, that some of those trade-offs are absolutely necessary. These are just wrenching problems for this nation, wrenching problems of fairness and adequacy of coverage.
I'd like to know what particular strengths you feel that you would bring that qualify you to run for the Senate of the United States.
You matching me up against whom? Well, for one thing, I've had a good deal of experience. I've had experience not only, I've had life experience, which is I think, one of the things that women, remember as I said before, we all bring our own experiences to our jobs. Women do bring the benefit of their lives to the legislative bodies. That's not unusual, so do the men. Agent Orange legislation was written by Tom Daschle, who's a Vietnam veteran. Bob Matsui, Norma Netta from Japan, Japanese Americans, but they put in the legislation that allowed for recompense for the Japanese Americans who were interned during the Second World War. If you take a look at the sanctions against South Africa put in place by black Americans, if you talk about Israel, you will listen to Steve Solars and Tom Lantos more than anybody else in the Congress. So we all bring our experiences. I think, for one thing, as a woman candidate, I can bring those experiences on health care, on what the effect of the economy on what's happening to women today to the job. In addition to that, I've had experience of 6 years in the Congress of the United States. I served on some fascinating committees like Public Works. But you learn a lot. You learn a lot about water resources, not a sexy committee, but I've served on water resources, I served on aviation, I served on surface transportation. Infrastructure is a real problem in this country. The airline industry is having all kinds of concerns. That's an effective piece of the economy, too. In addition to that, I served on aging. I am knowledgeable about aging issues and was a leader when I was in the House on that issue. And I served on the Budget Committee, so brought experience from that position as well. I've had, if you take a look at my career, I've been effective. During the campaign, as you may have noticed, they checked everything out that there was to be checked out about me. I taught 5 years in the New York City public school system. They went to not only teachers I worked with, my principal who was retired in Florida, and my kids who were 7 and 9 years old are now in their 30s. And they went to them and asked how I was. And I was an effective teacher. American Lawyer did a total investigation of my time as a practicing attorney in the DA's office. They cheated a little bit. They not only went to DAs I worked with and the judges I worked before, but they went to defense lawyers, would you believe that, to find out their opinion of me. Effective was the word that came out. And if you talk to people down in Congress, when Bev was mentioning before about the things I moved, I did. I got very involved in the party. I mean, you don't move to the position that I got in if you're not someone that people pay attention to as being an effective leader. So I think those are the things that I can bring down there: the ability to work as soon as I hit the ground. I've got enough people down there, enough people for whom I have been out raising money for the past. Talk about special interest. I'm one of those. Over the past 6 years, helping them to win a Democratic majority in the Senate, so I'll be able to get along with those people down there and be effective. Again, it's a matter of, are the people ready? And if they are, I'm going to do it. And then I'll show you. Then I'll show you. Okay, I'll take one last one. One last one, because everybody's got to go home. If you want to go ahead. I won't feel bad. Go. I will carry on after you're gone, but you can go. Go.
One more nonpartisan question.
One more. Is that coming from you?
That's right. No, not from me.
Okay. We want a nonpartisan question. Is there a nonpartisan question in the audience?
Many of the aspects of your speech directed themselves towards economic constraints and considerations of someone in office, which is appropriate. I think there is a crisis facing this country, which is very difficult to address directly with money. And it is a crisis, I think, of spirituality, a dissipation of the American family. I think that it's a fact that more than half of the children in this country are growing up in broken homes. I think many people here would agree that the modern mind, especially after the Reagan era of the 80s, finds it less and less possible to believe in something called God. It's a crisis of tremendous proportions in this country, which I think should be addressed by leadership, but is quite difficult. It is not mentioned. I don't know how you could address such a thing now or if you achieve a higher office. But could you speculate on some manner that the leadership in this country could approach this crisis?
There's no doubt that the family has broken down, as has been said, over the past 25, 30 years. It's a different family. I don't know if it's necessarily a broken down family, but it is a different family. Today, there are many more women who are single heads of household. Today, there are many women who are not getting married and having children at all. They've chosen career as their path in life. I think what has to happen, I mean, when I was talking about these various programs, I think what has to happen is that we have to be realistic when we talk about concerns about something, for instance, like the health care plan. But if you take a look, remember when I said the number of people who are not covered are working people and their families? A lot of those people are devastated, and some falling apart because they're not able to deal with proper care for their children. The educational system is suffering tremendously. If we were concerned about prenatal health care, if we were concerned about Head Start, we might be doing a service to our communities and eventually to society over a 10 or 20-year period by that long-term planning. I honestly don't think that elected leaders can get up and preach family. I don't know more than I think that, Nancy Reagan may be probably is a very well-meaning woman, but I don't think saying to kids, just say no, is sufficient. I don't think that's the way you deal with drugs. I don't think it's the way you deal with teenage pregnancies. It does not work. And to contend that doing the superficial stuff is pro-family is I think, it's not being honest. So my feeling is that the way legislators can deal with the whole concept of what is happening within our society is by looking at the root causes of some of the problems, instead of trying only to treat the symptoms by sloganism and by, feel-good epithets. Let me end with just one other comment, and that's that 1984 was an incredible campaign. There are lots of bits and pieces that I turn around and I say, oh, God, if only I had done or if only this had happened. But basically, I've got to tell you, I look back on that campaign and say it was really very, very important to this country. It did make a difference. I hear it today from young women who come up to me and say, because of 84, and I'm not saying because of me, because of the candidacy, I did, and I went to medical school, or I decided that I was going to try to do this job. And people, if nothing else, got a better attitude by themselves, but did that in addition to making other moves in elective office and in other ways. There are pieces of that campaign that I am going to carry with me forever. Actual visuals of rallies in Seattle, Puget Sound in the background, where people were sitting on levels of the streets going up into Seattle proper, and they had mics up all along at all levels. And as I spoke, it was the most fascinating thing to see, to watch the sound carried out. When I say watch, I mean watch, because you could see people's reaction to what I said. They'd start to applaud, and you would see it was like a wave watching. It was the most fascinating thing I've ever seen in my life. It's 7 years later, and I'm still talking about it, but it was just amazing. People said it was wonderful. It got me to slow down. But it was a wonderful, wonderful thing. There was a woman in Texas. I finished a speech. There were people screaming at me, and both Jim Wright and the governor of Texas wanted to protect the little lady. I said, sit down. But I quieted them down, and I did the speech, and then when it was all over, a woman came up to me, and she put her arms around me. I would say she was in her late 50s, early 60s, and she started to cry, and she said, I lost my son in Beirut. That mother went home and he had been killed when those Marines were bombed. That mother went home and will go home night after night and not have that son to hold. Unfortunately, that's going to be happening in the Gulf too. It was a campaign that allowed me to touch lives, and I am very, very grateful. I am really grateful that I had an opportunity to stand in for all of you. So I am pleased that I had an opportunity to share a little bit of my thoughts with you today. I am very grateful for what happened then. Grateful to my party, I'm grateful to my country, and I'm grateful to nice people like you. Thank you.
I know you're in a hurry to go home. I just want to thank everyone for coming. Geraldine Ferraro, thank you. You have touched our lives. And I just want you to remember the upcoming League events. Also, flowers are for sale. Please come and see us at the end. And please become a member of League if you are not now. We'd enjoy your membership. Thank you again.